tutorial. I'm making a sign for the Larkspur Pet Hospital about a town or two up the freeway from me. I had them sign off on the general shape of the sign based off my SketchUp drawing. So here I'm just measuring and plotting out the points to help me draw in the curve to get the shape of the sign down. I partially drove in some nails to use as bending points, to use a flexible piece of wood to kind of bend around the nails to help me generate the curve that I was looking for. The piece of wood is only about 1/8 of an inch thick, so it bends really nicely around the nails, which creates a really nice fair curve. The jigsaw is one of my least favorite tools, but this sign is just a little bit too big to throw up on the bandsaw. When I used the jigsaw, I made sure I stayed just a little bit away from the line, and then I came back with my belt sander and cleaned it up and just sanded right up to that line. The sign is two-sided, so I rough cut a second piece and then used a pattern bit on my router just to make an exact copy. To figure out how big to make the letters, I used Adobe Illustrator to do the layout. This made it real easy to stretch them out to the right size and fill the sign up perfectly. I then printed each letter out on a piece of paper and attached it to a piece of plywood so I could make a template for the letters. Before heading over to the bandsaw to cut out the letters, I drilled a hole at the corner of each letter. So this will make it a lot easier to turn the letter around on the bandsaw without pinching the blade or having to do a whole bunch of back cuts to get the letter turned to go the other direction. Once at the bandsaw, I just took my time to try to make the cleanest cut I could. While I was working in Illustrator, I also took the time to make some graphics that are going to go on the sign. This particular one I'm cutting out here is a mountain scene, and I used the same scaling tools to print it out to scale so I could just glue it to the plywood template. Now before cutting out the letters, I decided it would be easier to first cut out a recess for the stainless steel to go into. And the stainless steel is going to be sandwiched between the two halves of the sign for the letters to show through, so the letters will actually be stainless steel. I figured it would be easier to square up the corner with a chisel than to try to recut the edge of the steel. I printed out a second set of letters to do the layout on the sign itself and taped them down. And then I went through each letter and did a little hand filing and sanding to make sure each letter was perfect so any bumps wouldn't show up with the pattern bit on the router. To secure the template letters to the sign, I used some double stick tape along with some blue tape to help act as a release so it'd be easier to get the two pieces apart after routing. I couldn't find my 1/2-inch pattern bit, so I used a collar with just a 1/2-inch spiral upcut bit to hog out most of the materials. With the collar and the 1/2-inch bit, it left the edges of the letters really rounded. So after I hogged out the majority of the wood With the 1/2 inch bit, I switched to a 1/4 inch bit with a pattern routing bit with a pattern bearing on it, and went back around the edges and cleaned up all the edges and got into the corners nicely. And since the sign is double-sided, I clamped the other side to the first one I routed out and just used that as my template to route out all the letters on the second side. When I installed the stainless steel, I used some silicone caulk, hoping that that would allow the wood to move, but still hold the steel tight to the back of the sign so it would still look nice and clean. That white and black plastic I'm peeling off is just a PVC coating to protect the stainless steel from getting scratched. I ended up cutting out 2 arched pieces and putting the scratched faces back to back so that way none of the scratches would show through into the letters. I probably should have got a second hand to help me line up the other side of this when gluing the pieces together. When I dropped it down there, it slid and got silicone all over the steel, and that was a pain to clean up. Now the final part of the sign itself was to route a decorative edge around the perimeter. I used a panel raising bit normally for kitchen cabinets to create the profile, and I did it in 5 or 6 passes because it was such a huge bit and the sign was so large and awkward to wield around the router table. The decorative edge is going to get painted black, so I put down some blue tape and made sure I had a brand new blade and the utility knife to cut that tape nice and clean. Now moving on to the decorative post and frame that's going to hold the sign out in the parking lot. This first line I'm using my calipers to draw is just an arbitrary width, and then the second line is actually set to the remaining width of the material to give me a nice smooth arc. I rough cut out the arch and decorative components on the bandsaw, and then I'll head over to the spindle sander and belt sander to smooth it all out and clean up the edges right up to the line. Now for the decorative cove at the top of the post, I found a really large coving bit for my router, and I slowed the speed way down on this just because these large bits in a handheld router can get a little unwieldy. And I just took my time, a couple of passes to make the final cove. The angle on the point of the post was too steep to safely cut in a miter saw, so I hogged off the bulk of the material on the bandsaw and then just cleaned it up with the hand plane and hand plane down to my line and to the center point. I used some exterior dominoes for the joinery and marine epoxy to glue it all together. The sign is held within the frame using just some stainless steel eye hooks. And that's it. Thanks for watching.